I never thought something like this could happen in my own neighborhood. The place I grew up in, the place my family called home, had turned into a nightmare. And all because of the HOA. It all started when my disabled sister, Emily, moved in with me. She had been in a terrible accident a few years ago, leaving her unable to walk. But she never let that stop her from living her life. She was strong, independent, and determined to do things on her own. That's what I admired most about her. When she came to live with me, I made sure everything in the house was accessible for her. I built ramps, widened doorways, and even got her a specialized wheelchair to make it easier for her to move around. The one thing she loved most? Sitting on the front porch, enjoying the fresh air and watching the world go by. But apparently, the HOA had a problem with that. It started with small complaints. First, they sent letters saying that the wheelchair ramp on my porch was not in compliance with HOA aesthetics. Then, they claimed that Emily's wheelchair was being left outside in a way that disrupted neighborhood harmony. It was ridiculous. I ignored their warnings, knowing they were just being petty. But then, things escalated. One afternoon, Emily called me in a panic. Her voice was trembling, and I could hear the fear in her words. "They're chaining me down," she whispered. I rushed home, my heart pounding in my chest. When I arrived, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Emily was on the ground, struggling to move. Her wheelchair was chained to the porch railing. Standing over her were two members of the HOA board, smirking like they had just done something heroic. I froze for a moment, unable to process what I was seeing. Then rage took over. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, running to Emily's side. One of them, a middle-aged woman with a smug grin, crossed her arms. "Your sister was violating HOA regulations by leaving her wheelchair in the front yard. This is private property, and we're enforcing the rules." I clenched my fists. "You chained a disabled woman to her own wheelchair? Do you even hear how insane that sounds?" The other man, a bald guy in a green HOA uniform, scoffed. "Rules are rules. If you have a problem with it, take it up with the HOA board." I was shaking with anger. I reached for my phone to call the police, but before I could, something even more shocking happened. A black SUV pulled up to the curb. The doors swung open, and out stepped two men in suits. They looked around for a moment before flashing their badges. "FBI," one of them said. "We need to have a word with you." The HOA members turned pale. I had no idea what was about to happen, but I had a feeling that karma was finally catching up to them. The moment the FBI agents stepped out of their SUV, the smug expressions on the HOA members' faces melted away. Their confidence wavered, replaced with confusion and fear. The man who had chained Emily's wheelchair took a step back, as if hoping he could disappear into the neatly trimmed hedges behind him. I was still kneeling beside Emily, my hand gripping the chain that kept her bound to the porch railing. My heart was pounding, a mix of anger and relief flooding through me. The taller FBI agent, a man with sharp eyes and a commanding presence, stepped forward. He flashed his badge again, making sure everyone saw it. "We received reports of civil rights violations taking place under the authority of this HOA," he said, his voice firm. "And after reviewing the evidence, we have reason to believe that your organization has been engaging in illegal activities." The HOA woman, her name was Deborah, if I remembered correctly, forced a nervous laugh. "Oh, come on, officers. This is just a little neighborhood dispute. No need to make a big deal out of it." The second FBI agent, a stocky man with a no-nonsense expression, didn't look amused. "You chained a disabled woman to a railing," he said coldly. "That's a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, among other things." Deborah's smile vanished completely. The bald man, whose name tag read Carl, tried to regain control of the situation. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said, his voice shaky. "We were just enforcing HOA rules." I couldn't hold back my rage any longer. I stood up, fists clenched. "You physically restrained my sister like she was an animal. You don't get to hide behind HOA rules for something this sick." Carl opened his mouth to respond, but the FBI agent held up a hand. "Save it," he said. "We've been investigating this HOA for months. This is just the latest in a long list of offenses." My breath caught in my throat. "Wait, what?" The taller agent nodded. "Your HOA has been under surveillance due to numerous complaints of discrimination, illegal fines, and even embezzlement." He turned to Deborah and Carl, his gaze sharp. "And now, with what you've done today, we have more than enough to press charges." Deborah's face drained of color. "Charges? Civil rights violations. Fraud. Abuse of power. The list goes on," the agent said. He looked at me and Emily. "Are you okay?" I helped Emily into her wheelchair, undoing the chains as gently as I could. She was shaken but managed to give the agents a small nod. I'm okay now, she said, her voice steady despite what she had just endured. The agents exchanged a glance before turning back to the HOA members. Carl and Deborah, you're coming with us. Carl stammered, looking around as if hoping someone would come to his rescue. You can't do this. We were just following the rules. Tell it to the judge, the agent said, as he signaled for his partner to cuff them. As the metal handcuffs clicked around their wrists, Deborah finally lost her composure. You can't arrest me. I'm the president of this HOA. I have rights. The agent smirked. Yeah? So does she, he said, nodding toward Emily. The two were led toward the black SUV, their protests fading as they were pushed inside. I watched in stunned silence, barely believing what I was seeing. Emily reached over and squeezed my hand. I guess justice does exist after all. I let out a shaky breath, my mind racing. The nightmare wasn't over yet, there was still so much to unpack, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we weren't alone in this fight. And that was a feeling I would hold on to. As the black SUV carrying the disgraced HOA officials disappeared around the corner, a strange silence settled over the neighborhood. The bystanders who had gathered to watch the commotion slowly trickled back into their homes, whispering amongst themselves. It was as if the entire street had collectively realized that the iron grip of the HOA was finally weakening. I turned to Emily, who was still gripping the arms of her wheelchair tightly. Her knuckles were white, her breathing uneven. I knelt beside her, placing a comforting hand on hers. It's over, I said softly. She let out a breathless laugh. For now. The FBI agents were still there, discussing things amongst themselves. One of them, the taller one who had taken charge earlier, approached me. We're going to need your statement, he said. And your sister's, if she's up for it. Emily nodded. Absolutely. They guided us to the edge of the porch, away from the remaining HOA members who had managed to avoid immediate arrest. I noticed some of them eyeing us with a mixture of fear and hostility, as if blaming us for what had just happened. I didn't care. One of the agents pulled out a notepad. Let's start from the beginning. How long has this HOA been targeting you and your sister? I exhaled slowly. It started small, I said. Little fines for things that didn't make sense, unauthorized decorations, grass not cut to HOA standards. That sort of nonsense. But it escalated when they realized Emily lived here. The agent raised an eyebrow. Escalated how? Emily's voice was bitter. They started harassing me specifically. First, they fined my brother for having a wheelchair ramp that wasn't approved, even though it met all safety standards. Then they started sending passive-aggressive letters about how I needed to be mindful of the aesthetic of the neighborhood. She let out a humorless chuckle. Apparently, disabled people don't fit into their vision of perfection. The agent's expression darkened. We've seen this kind of thing before. HOAs discriminating against disabled residents under the guise of neighborhood standards. I clenched my fists. It got worse. When they realized we weren't backing down, they outright banned street parking for non-HOA members. I gestured toward our driveway. Emily's caregiver couldn't even park here without getting fined. Emily shook her head. And when I tried to reason with them, Deborah told me that people like me should consider moving somewhere better suited for my condition. The agent's grip on his pen tightened. That's blatant discrimination. I nodded. We thought about suing, but we didn't have the resources to go against them. And then today happened. I gestured to the chains that still lay on the porch, the metal glinting under the sunlight. The agent sighed. This is worse than we thought. But at least now, we have a solid case. Deborah and Carl aren't just going to face HOA violations, they're looking at serious criminal charges. Emily smiled faintly. Good. The agent looked at both of us. Listen, you two should consider pressing charges as well. The FBI will handle the bigger investigation, but what they did to your sister is grounds for a personal lawsuit. I exchanged a glance with Emily. She nodded. We will. The agent smiled slightly. Good. Because people like them don't deserve to get away with this. At that moment, another black SUV pulled up, and two more agents stepped out. One of them spoke with the lead agent quietly before approaching us. We just received a warrant to seize all HOA financial records, he announced. We're going to start digging. I smirked. I bet they won't like what you find. The agent chuckled. Neither will the judge. As the FBI moved to confiscate HOA documents, I finally felt something I hadn't in a long time, hope. The nightmare wasn't over, but for the first time, we had the upper hand. And I intended to make sure we kept it. The next morning, the neighborhood felt different. It was as if a dark cloud had finally lifted. For years, we had lived under the oppressive rule of the HOA, with their arbitrary rules and constant threats. But now, with Deborah and Carl in FBI custody and an active investigation into the HOA's finances, people weren't as afraid anymore. Emily and I sat on the porch, sipping coffee. The chain that had once bound her wheelchair to our house lay discarded in the grass, a symbol of everything we had endured. She tapped the rim of her cup, deep in thought. "I wonder how many others they've done this to," she murmured. I nodded. "More than just us, I'd bet." And I was right. By noon, neighbors started stopping by, sharing their own horror stories. An elderly couple, the Martins, revealed that the HOA had forced them to pay thousands in fines just because their front door was the wrong shade of beige. A single mother, Claire, explained how they had harassed her for having a small inflatable pool in her backyard. The worst was an Iraq War veteran named James, who had been fined repeatedly for parking his vehicle in his own driveway, because the HOA claimed it wasn't aesthetically pleasing. "They told me my truck made the neighborhood look cheap," James said, his fists clenched. "I fought for this country, and they acted like I was dirt under their shoes." Hearing their stories, I realized something. This wasn't just about Emily and me. This was about everyone they had abused. Emily leaned forward in her wheelchair. "We need to do something," she said. "We can't just let this end with Deborah and Carl going to jail. The whole HOA system needs to be dismantled." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. "But how?" Claire asked. "They've been in power for years. Even with the FBI involved, the HOA still technically exists." I took a deep breath, an idea forming. "We take them down legally. We expose everything." James frowned. "How?" "We start by getting the HOA's financial records," I said. "The FBI is already investigating, but if we can get proof of mismanagement, we can rally the entire neighborhood to vote them out." Claire shook her head. "They control the elections. They'll never let us win." "They controlled the elections," I corrected. "But now, with their leaders under investigation, we have a chance." Emily smiled. "He's right. The rest of the HOA board is scared. They know they're in trouble. If we put enough pressure on them, they'll have no choice but to hold a fair election." James grinned. "I like the sound of that." The Martins exchanged a glance before nodding. "We're in." And just like that, the fight wasn't just ours anymore. We spent the rest of the day gathering evidence. People dug up old HOA letters, fine notices, and emails proving the corruption. Some even had recordings of HOA members making discriminatory remarks. The more we uncovered, the worse it got. That evening, Emily and I sat at the dining table, sifting through the mountain of documents. "This is enough to sink them," I said, holding up a stack of fraudulent invoices. Deborah and Carl were embezzling money. Emily's eyes widened. "How much?" "At least $100,000, I said grimly. "They were pocketing fines and using HOA funds for personal vacations." She let out a low whistle. "That's prison time." "Exactly," I said. "And if we expose this to the entire neighborhood, the HOA won't stand a chance." Emily grinned. "Let's bring them down." The battle wasn't over. But we were ready. The next morning, I woke up to a flurry of notifications on my phone. Overnight, our small neighborhood rebellion had gained serious traction. James had leaked some of the financial documents online, and Claire had contacted a local news station. By the time I stepped outside, reporters were already swarming the neighborhood. Cameras flashed, microphones were shoved in my face, and questions bombarded me from every direction. Is it true that the HOA embezzled over $100,000? How long has this corruption been going on? What do you plan to do next? I took a deep breath, knowing this was our moment to strike. "We're fighting back," I said, voice firm. "This HOA has abused its power for too long, and we're putting an end to it." The reporters scribbled furiously as James stepped forward. "We're demanding a fair election. No more rigging, no more intimidation. Every homeowner gets a vote, and we're electing a new board that actually represents the people." A murmur of approval ran through the gathered neighbors. Some clapped, others cheered. For the first time in years, people weren't afraid. Just then, a black sedan screeched to a halt down the street. The remaining HOA board members, those who hadn't been arrested, stepped out, their faces pale and panicked. One of them, a wiry man named Greg, raised his hands. "We need to talk." Emily, sitting in her wheelchair beside me, folded her arms. "Now you want to talk?" Greg swallowed hard. We didn't know about the embezzlement," he stammered. "That was all Deborah and Carl." James scoffed. "Oh, please. You all went along with the ridiculous fines and power trips. You didn't care until now." The crowd murmured in agreement. Greg wiped sweat from his forehead. "Look, we're willing to step down. But we need to do it the right way. If we hold an emergency election, will that satisfy everyone?" Claire crossed her arms. "And who will run it?" "You." Greg shook his head quickly. No, no. We'll bring in a third party. A neutral committee. I exchanged a glance with Emily. This was it. The moment we had fought for. Fine, I said. But it happens this weekend. No delays. Greg nodded so fast it looked like his head might fall off. Agreed. The reporters caught every second of the exchange, and within an hour, news stations across the state were running the story. Corrupt HOA faces rebellion, residents demand fair election. That evening, our house became election headquarters. Neighbors streamed in and out, volunteering to help with campaign materials. We printed flyers, made signs, and knocked on every door in the community. This is bigger than just our neighborhood, Claire said, looking at her phone. People all over the country are sharing our story. Some are even saying they want to fight their own HOAs. Emily chuckled. Who knew a bunch of power-hungry board members would unite America? James grinned. I don't care about the rest of the country. I just want to see these guys gone. The election was set for Saturday. Until then, we had to make sure every homeowner showed up to vote. Because if we lost, everything we had fought for would mean nothing. The morning of the election felt like the calm before a storm. The sun had barely risen, yet the neighborhood was already buzzing with activity. Volunteers set up tables at the community center, where voting would take place. The third-party election monitors, hired to ensure fairness, arrived early, checking machines and paperwork. Emily and I stood near the entrance, watching as homeowners trickled in, some hesitant, others determined. There was an unspoken tension in the air, years of fear and resentment finally boiling to the surface. James approached, adjusting the American flag pin on his shirt. Turnout's looking good, he said. Better than I expected. Because people finally believe they can make a difference, Emily replied. For the first time, they know their votes won't be ignored. Greg and the remaining HOA board members lingered on the sidelines, looking like prisoners awaiting sentencing. Their earlier arrogance was gone. Now, they were just desperate to avoid the same fate as Deborah and Carl. As voting continued, I noticed something strange, groups of well-dressed men and women entering in pairs, each one quickly casting their ballot before leaving. Who are they? I asked Claire, who was running voter check-ins. She frowned. They're homeowners, technically. Investors who bought properties here but never actually live in them. I tensed. And they're voting? She nodded. Legally, they can. But I'll be honest, something feels off. My gut twisted. The old HOA was trying to tip the scales. They knew they couldn't win with actual residents, so they were calling in favors from absentee landlords and investors. I clenched my fists. How many of them have voted? Claire checked the list. About 40 so far. That was nearly a quarter of the votes. Emily must have seen the anger on my face. We need to do something. I thought quickly. We can't stop them from voting, but we can make sure our side turns out in even bigger numbers. We spread out, knocking on every remaining door. James even called his friends who had been hesitant to come, urging them to show up before the polls closed. By the time voting ended, nearly every homeowner had cast a ballot. Now, all we could do was wait. The announcement. An hour later, the votes were tallied. A hush fell over the community center as the election monitor stepped onto the stage with an envelope in hand. We have the results, she announced, her voice echoing in the silent room. With 62% of the vote, the new HOA board has been elected. The crowd held its breath. The previous board has been officially removed from power. A cheer erupted. People clapped, whistled, and even hugged one another. Emily grinned beside me, her eyes gleaming with victory. Greg slumped into a chair, defeated. The other former board members quietly slipped out the back, avoiding eye contact. James laughed. And just like that, the reign of terror is over. The aftermath. Over the next few weeks, the new HOA board got to work. The absurd rules were overturned, the fraudulent fines were refunded, and accessibility changes were prioritized. One of the first things they did? Officially ban any future HOA leaders from ever targeting disabled residents. Emily rolled her wheelchair onto the porch, watching as neighbors removed the ridiculous, approved decorations and restored their homes to how they truly wanted them. She smirked. It's finally over. I smiled, taking a deep breath of the fresh, free air. Yeah, it is. We had won. And this time, the HOA would never be used as a weapon against the people again.